Hey guys, today we're going to be covering X-ray analysis. We have a lot to cover, so listen up quick, have a pencil and paper ready to jot down any questions. We are going to be flying, so buckle up my pretties. Alright guys, I'm going to mark the analog pelvis for you real fast and show you how to do that with a parallel. First we're going to start with the femur heads, and you're going to go to the top of each femur head, then you're going to strike a line all the way across. Then we're going to roll up at that same angle to our iliac crest. When we get to the top of our first one, we're going to draw a line. And when we get to the top of the other one, we're going to draw a line. Invert the parallel. Roll down to the ischial tubes. When you get to that first one, the bottom of it, draw a line. Roll down to the next one, draw a line. You're going to be measuring these to determine your AS and IN. I'll show you that on the digital. Next, we're going to determine sacral rotation and pelvic rotation for our EX and IN. You mark the edges of the sacrum going perpendicular to your femur headline, striking through those dots. When you measure here and here, you're getting your measurements for your sacrum. Same perpendicular to the femur headline, we're going to go to our S2 tubercle dot, draw a line through there, keep the parallel right there, and draw a line down by the pubic symphysis. And we're going to measure this distance to determine our rotation. So moving over into our digital, I want to first jump down and look at our obturators. Our obturators are another way for us to determine our listings. So your shorter diagonal is going to be your AS. The longer diagonal is going to be the PI. The shorter width at the base is going to represent your IN, and the longer width at the base is going to be the EX. So these are just other ways to figure out that listing on top of measuring. So the taller ilium is going to be your PI, the shorter ilium is going to be your AS. In order to determine the rotation, we can also look at the pubic symphysis in relation to the natal cleft. The pubic symphysis is always going to rotate towards the IN side. And you can also measure the width of the ilium here, so the inside of the PSIS to the outer rim of the ilium. You can also look at this area of the ilium. The shorter side is going to be your EX, whereas the longer side is going to be your IN. Then when we're looking at the sacrum, you're going to be measuring, it's going to be these in pink here, the outside, the outside of the sacrum compared to the center, or S2, and the longer side is going to represent your posterior rotated sacrum. So we're going to come over to the lateral. I've put some rough George's lines on here and some feather lines. So we're looking at the posterior body line. If it is, we're always comparing the bone above to the bone below and how that compares, and if one is posterior to the other. So 3 is posterior to 4. 4 is posterior to 5. So 4 being that last posterior one, because 5 is not posterior to the sacrum, that's something that we could potentially list. But that's just one of our criteria. Another criteria is looking at where these angles come in at and where those lines cross. So this L5 sacrum crosses pretty close, and much closer than L4 and L5 right here. So that's something that we want to look at. And actually what we're dealing with here is we have a spondylo, and that's represented by this break here. Let me see if I can get some of these lines out of the way for you. But that is this break in the pars right here, and L5 is actually slipped forward. So something that you have to be mindful of when you are looking at something like this is, do I have a base posterior sacrum, or do I have a spondylo? So you can see the break here on the lateral. Some of them you may need to take an oblique for, but that's what a spondy looks like, and this is a grade 1 spondy. When we're working in the thoracic, same as in the lumbars, you can do these feather lines all the way up, as well as George's lines. What we're going to be mainly using is our George's lines. You're not going to see a lot of these feather lines converging like you would see that in the cervical spine or the lumbar spine, because when you're working in the thoracics, these discs are actually going to open up more in the back than they are in the front. So you're not going to see as much convergence when you're using feather lines. So when we're looking at George's lines, and we're coming down and looking for posteriority, 8 is, let's say 8 is posterior to 9, 9 is not posterior to 10, so 8 is our last posterior vertebra. So we're going to come over to our A to P. I'm going to use the inferior end plates of my T8 vertebra. Other points that you can use is the bottom of the pedicles. Roll that line up into the body so you're not in the way of the disc. You're going to do the same thing for T9. Roll that line up. The next thing that we're going to look at is rotation. So you can do that by looking at the pedicle shadows. You can also look at the width from the body to the spinous. So it's looking to me that this left-hand side, you can see a little bit more of the left-hand side than you can the right-hand side. Pedicle is a little bit hard to make out on this guy. And those may be a little bit hard to differentiate, but just for the sake of this, we're going to go with a PR. And looking at our wedge lines, it's more closed on the right hand side, so we would actually list this as a PRI. If this were rotated to the left, so say we had a larger pedicle here, smaller pedicle here, larger distance, smaller distance, where you have, your spinous, and your spinous is going to this larger side of the wedge, that would be a PLS. Alright, we are in the home stretch. We made it to the cervicals. So just as before, we're going to have our feather lines, we're going to have George's lines to determine what is our posterior segment, and then we'll come over to the A to P and list it from there. When we're looking at atlas, you're going to put dots at the anterior tubercle and the thinnest part of the posterior arch. This arch has a little bit of rotation in it, so we're actually going to just mark where those lines converge there at the back of the arch, and then draw a line through that. When listing atlas, we're going to compare it to C2. When drawing that line, you're going to draw a vertical line through the body of C2 and then a perpendicular line to that. And then we're looking at the lines, how they converge or diverge. So when the lines open up in the front like this, that means we have a superior atlas. If they were to come down and close at the front, then that would indicate an inferior atlas. When we're looking at occiput, there are a couple different ways that you can do this. The chapters say that you can do the foramen magnum line, which is what I've marked here, and that's putting dots and drawing a line through the back of the occiput here. Another way to do it, and you'll learn this in school, is marking the posterior and anterior part of the condyle, and then you can draw a line through that. And then we're going to be comparing this line to our atlas. We're always comparing the bone above to the bone below. So when we have these lines that are converging in the front and diverging and opening up in the back, that's indicating a PS occiput. If we had lines that were closing down in the back, that would indicate an AS occiput. Alright, moving over to our A to P, upper cervical, I'm going to start with marking C2, and we put a dot in the center of the base of the dens, and then at the top of the spinous where it meets the lamina. And then you draw a line through that, and that's going to determine the rotation of C2. So if I found that bone to be posterior on my lateral, and I'm going to list it, it's going to be a PL right now. Now I need to determine if there's any wedging present. So the way that I'm going to do that is I put dots in the radial opacities of C2, draw a line through that, and I'm comparing that to my inferior end plate of C3. It looks to me more open on this left-hand side, so I would list this as a PLS. Moving to the atlas, we make our atlas transverse line where the posterior arch meets the lateral masses. Draw a line through that. It's more open on this left-hand side, so that's going to indicate laterality. On the lateral, we found that this was an AS atlas. With the open side on the left, it's an ASL. When we determine rotation, we're going to be looking at the width of the lateral masses. The wider lateral mass is going to be your anterior rotation. The narrower lateral mass is going to be your posterior rotation. So if I were to list this, I would list the atlas as an ASLA. Moving up to the occiput, you're going to put dots in the mastoid notches here, draw a line through that, and then you're comparing that line to the atlas line. This is more open on the right hand side, so I'm going to look at what I had on my lateral, and that was a PS on the lateral. Then we're going to have an RS, since this is more open on the right. Then to determine rotation, we're actually going to look at the lateral mass of the atlas. Since we determined that this right lateral mass is narrower, we're saying that that's posterior. The occiput is going to rotate anterior, so they're going to counter rotate on each other. So my final listing for the occiput would be a PS RS RA. Alright guys, you made it. Congratulations. And believe it or not, that is nowhere near the amount of material that we could have covered. We could talk about MD80, we could talk about special listings. There's a plethora of information more that we could have gone into with analyzing x-rays. But that was just hopefully a quick, simple version. Ask a lot of questions. If you're having any trouble with anything, get in touch with a certified member. We are more than happy to help you with whatever questions you might have. All right, see you next time.